and you have copies of the slides, you should have a writing instrument. Take notes, and if at the end you find that it's not useful, throw it away. In the recycle bin. However, if it is in fact useful, you're going to find that it's good to have the connection between your remembering and the specific slide. So we request that you do that. So borrow a writing instrument if you do not have one. This is going to be interactive. I work, as I said, for Sauter Betances and Associates, and we get invited to assist organizations to increase their cultural competencies, for increasing their mission-driven, diverse teams. We're talking about leveraging diversity intelligence, and we use the word intelligence deliberately and carefully. It's our capacity to understand that what we see is not necessarily what we get. And so we need to appreciate that. Leveraging diversity intelligence for transformational leadership. And leadership here is not just the senior leaders or managers, but all of us in our informal and formal areas of responsibility. Whenever you are engaged in a process of change, remember, we are not working in a changing USDA. We are not working in a changing USA. We are working in a change USA and USDA. It's changed already. I want you to say, change is inevitable. Say that.
Change is inevitable.
Growth is optional.
Growth is optional.
So you see, change comes from the outside. Growth is an inside job. So change is going to happen whether you like it or not. It's unstoppable. And what your leadership is saying, please grow as a result of the challenge of change. And in order to do that, you got to be dissatisfied with the way things are. And you have to have a vision of where it is that you want the agency to go. And then you have to put it into place a process that connects your vision with your dissatisfaction. And then you take steps to educate people to the awareness that this is not a game, this is not reverse discrimination, this is not about putting unqualified people to replace qualified people. This is not about being politically correct. This is about the realization, and I wonder if you could say with me, say diversity is not about counting heads, please.
Diversity is not about counting heads.
It's about making heads count.
It's about making heads count.
So we educate people about the need to create the essential awareness. After we create awareness, the next step is to grow the talent of people we haven't always developed before. We must make the pipeline of talent development inclusive. And then we got to measure it to see if we're doing the right thing the right way. We've got to go beyond changing the bulletin board to changing the organizational culture. And then we take steps to apply lessons learned for continuous improvement. And when you do that, you better quote the boss. Quote your most senior leaders. And you say, well, that's just talk. It could be, but it's got to start with talk before you walk. Give me a bam. So in one voice, I want you to read. I'm going to start reading with you to keep you in the timing. And then I'm going to withdraw. and let you continue to read out loud as we quote the boss. Okay? 1, 2, and then I'm going to read. Everybody.
There is a massive effort within USDA to change the culture. There is a real commitment from the top down. At the end of it, what we hope to be able to say is USDA programs are more accepting of diversity, more inclusive, and certainly far more accessible than they have been in the past.
Quote the boss. And that's an extremely important statement because it says it's about the USDA culture accepting of diversity. And why is that important? Because every federal agency, I want you to say, if we work for a federal agency, say that.
If we work for a federal agency,
We have discriminated in the past.
we have discriminated in the past.
Say every federal agency has discriminated against African Americans, Hispanics, Native American Indians, and other groups. See, if you work for a federal agency, it doesn't matter whether it's DOD, Commerce, Labor, Education, Housing, every agency has discriminated because every agency reflects the values of the generation in charge. And there's a new generation in town that basically says, we can't do that anymore. We cannot continue to preach equality and practice exclusivity. We must not destroy with our feet what we build with our hands. Give me a bam. And that's why it's so important that you quote the boss. Notice that there are 2 books up there as an example of the 2 wings of the same airplane. Martha Langeland has written a wonderful book called Back Off. And what I love about this book is that she basically talks about how to put an end to sexual harassment on its tracks. If you're likely to be a victim of sexual harassment, if you have people in your family that are likely to confront it, get them a copy of this wonderful book, Back Off, because she says, let's get rid of it without making it legal. We don't have to make it a legal thing, but we have to confront it, put a stop to it on its tracks. And then there's the other book that talks about diversity for the technical professions. And there are about 20 books right now in the literature that specifically relate to different dimensions of diversity, including Marilyn Doden's book, Implementing Diversity. If you're going to do diversity right, then read one of these books, and I suggest that you read it like a novel. Just read it. It's amazing to me how many people say, we would love to do diversity training, and have never read one book about diversity. And so we need to put a stop to that, and that's why I put these 2 titles up there. Notice in the next slide, in terms of what I call the presentation overview. And the overview basically says, the reason why we need diversity inclusions to inform our transformational quest at APHIS in USDA is because of the changing demographics. For the first time, we are conscious of the fact that there are diverse groups knocking on the door of opportunity, and emotionally, we lack the intelligence to be accepting and welcoming and so forth, and to get out of our comfort zones. So the reason why we need to change is because in climate surveys, in assessment of employee dissatisfaction, USDA needs to basically improve. The good thing about that is that the top leadership is saying we need to improve, and it's got to be top down. The people that must be held accountable are at the top. And what I love about USDA is that I have had people, all of your administrators at the highest level have sat down and participated in what you're doing here today at Riverdale. That's powerful. Say bam. My qualifications are as such. I'll give you a little bit of what I have done. I was a professor of sociology for a quarter of a century. I hold 2 graduate degrees from Harvard University. I was a high school dropout. I was abused as a child. I was abandoned as a child. I suffered stigma and rejection. And eventually, I became a product of transformation. And I'm going to share that with you in a little while. But as a result of what I've been able to accomplish, I've been given the opportunity to work with the Fortune 5, with the Fortune 1s and 2s and 3s in corporate America. I have met with over 1,000 school system leadership all over the United States of America. I have trained preachers. I have trained people in different agencies. And in that spirit, I have come to you, and that has taken me to Plum Island, to Ames, to Minneapolis, to Fort Collins, to Raleigh, North Carolina, headquarters, and Riverdale, plus some of your sister agencies at USDA. And as you know, there are testimonials that speak to the way that has been received. But let me just simply say, let me just remind you, if you take a look at all of you here and you think about your salaries and your benefits and what you have left undone, plus my fee, plus the expense of the team that's putting the video together, this is a huge expense. And all I can say is it better be worth it. And if we're not focusing on mission, we shouldn't be wasting your time. Give me a bam. Amen. So in that spirit, I have the qualifications, with your permission, that will allow me to talk about the tough topics with your permission. And always remember that my opinion on any subject cannot be more important than your dignity and worth as an American citizen and as a member of this team. Nothing that I say can be more important than your dignity and worth. Give me a bam. Amen. And it's in that spirit that I ask you, do I have your permission to discuss the tough topics? Give me a bam. Amen. And I promise you that I will not participate in mugging, but maybe a little bit of surgery here and there. Our learning goals are very simple. My hope is that you will walk out of here. My hope is that you will walk out of here with 2 or 3 additional best practice or strategies to add value to the great things that you are already doing, in making sure that when we talk about diversity, we're not talking about coalitions of color, but coalitions of interest for mission excellence. We need to become an extension of each other's best self. We need to respect each other, and then we need to get out of our comfort zones so that we can develop each other. And in that spirit, those are the learning outcomes that I hope will come as a result of that. What I would like to suggest right now is that we take a break. Now listen carefully. When I ask you to stand up and shake hands and say to each other, let's do transformation right, that's called restoring our levels of alertness. That's what? Now you're about to leave the room, and you're going to restore your levels of comfort. When you go to lunch, you restore your levels of health, and when you go home, you restore your levels of sanity. So please, let's take a 10-minute break and restore your levels of comfort. Thank you very much. All right, good folks. Welcome back. I am a product of mentoring. My father and mother divorced. My father was an alcoholic. He was emotionally crippled by the fact that his father, my grandfather, was a police officer killed in the line of duty. Grandma died of a heart attack. He was orphaned. He was black. He was poor in Harlem in the age of segregation. And my mom came from the countryside, didn't have much formal education. They got married, and look what they did. I am a blended heritage American. My mom couldn't take care of us, and he was not providing the child support that was needed. So she took me to her native Puerto Rico and my brothers and my sister and gave the boys away to strangers. And if you're a little boy at 7 years of age, for example, living in the home of a stranger, you don't have the same protections that if they live with you as a parent. And so that was part of the journey that begins to shape me as a child from poverty, learning the informal language of our people in Puerto Rico, which was not middle-class proficient Spanish, but the informal language of the poor. Back to New York City, this time to the Bronx, learning the informal language of folks who lived in our mean streets and poor communities. So I was learning not middle class English rather, I was learning the informal English of African Americans, Ebonics. So I was incompetent at the middle class level in 2 languages. We went to school, and schools did not know how to deal with the new demographics. And so teachers would speak to us in English, and we didn't understand, not because we lacked intelligence, but because we lacked proficiency in English, and then they began to fail us for not knowing what we had not been taught. So we had no understandable instruction. Now, something very curious happens, because if you cannot be good about being good, you'll be good about being bad, because all of us got to be good about something. Give me a bam. So if you can't get your name on the wall with a diploma, you'll get spray paint and get your name on the wall anyway. If you can't join the legal economy, you'll join what? The illegal economy. If you don't have a family in your house and in your apartment and in your community, you create and invent a family in the streets, and we call that what? And a gang is nothing more than an indicator that there's a breakdown in the traditional family. And if you can't do it with your brains, you do it with your fist or your genitalia, and everybody loses. And that was my reality. And my older brother, he was gifted with a physique that made him a prince in the streets. So he got involved in gangs and in violence and goes to prison and eventually dies of violence. My other brother made junkies of 13 and 14-year-olds and disappears from the face of the earth. My sister's first husband dies of an overdose. Second, cirrhosis of the liver. Third, she stabs to death defending herself from a brutal beating. I had 9 scars in my body. Grew up on welfare. We were so poor, somebody broke into a little apartment and didn't take anything. I mean, that's cold. And my stepfather, womanizer. My mom told him to hit the road. And I had a little brother, little Louis, 3 years old, that he claimed to love and adore, as we actually did. And if he couldn't have his son on his own terms, nobody could. So he murdered my little brother and disappears from the face of the earth. And they never caught him. And I remember going to the funeral home, and I looked inside and I saw a little casket. I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. I was 14 years old. 15 years old. I moved out of there and went home and sobbed. And I must confess to you, to this day, I don't know where he's buried. But she wanted to get away from the murderer, so she teams up with a thug, and it didn't get any better. So we moved to the west side of the city of Chicago on Roosevelt Road in Kedzie. And I decided that when I got to be 17 years of age, what I really wanted to do, since I had not gotten in problem with the law, I wanted to join the United States Air Force and become an air police officer to shed my reputation as a dangerous urban male, to find myself expressing my patriotism, to see the world and find discipline and opportunity, and to buy me a 1955 Ford Victoria. No, it was not a classic then, just 3 years old. And so I kissed people goodbye, went to sign up so they would send me to Lackland Air Force Base for my basic training, and I flunked the test. And I was heartbroken. My mama from time to time would find us and bring us together again, and it was one of those opportunities where I was with her. And as was her custom, she went to church. And there was a chaplain, tall, white male. God made him a white male. And he preached. And afterwards, my mama goes to the chaplain and says, my Sammy is heartbroken. He got rejected. He's so embarrassed. He doesn't want to come out of that basement hole on Fillmore Avenue near California. And he said this, have Sammy come over to the hospital in which I work. It's about 40 miles west in the suburbs. He can take the Burlington line, apply for a job, and then he can stay there for 4 months and then retake the test and join the Air Force then. And so I took my train and went out there to the suburbs, and that's when I began to meet a lot of white folks. And a lot of people that were different than me. And I'll never forget, because they had, when you apply for a job, they had a little sign that said, some employees make us happy when they come, and some when they leave. And I made up my mind that they were going to be happy with me when I came. And so I got a job at 95 cents an hour as an orderly in this hospital. And I was spending most of my money in transportation, but at least I got home real late. And I was embarrassed, and that way I could hide from the fact that I had experienced rejection in the military. And that's, my life began to change when my boss, a tiny little lady with a long bony finger, got parental on me. And she was outraged that when the other kids that came to work for the summer left back my birthday is on May 17th. So by the time I got the job, a lot of other young people came to work in the summer at the hospital, and when they left back to school, I remained. And she said, Sam, come here. I said, yes, ma'am. She says, what are you doing here? I said, I'm working for you. She said, don't get sassy. I said, what be sassy? Why aren't you in school? "Oh, Ms. Yamasaki, I got it all figured out. I don't need to go to school. What I need to do is wait 2 more months and then take my test over again to join the military. I'm joining the United States Air Force and see the world and buy me a 1955 Ford Victoria." And that tiny little lady with the long bony finger got parental on me, and she says, "You're not joining anything until you graduate from high school and college. You're not joining anything. Son, you got to graduate from high school." Say high school. "And you got to graduate from college." Say college. And then she says, "But you're not going to do well in school." I said, "Like what it is?" She said, "I had to graduate from where?" And, but you're not going to do well in school. I said, "Why?" "Because I'm stupid? Because I'm not smart?" She said, "Sit down, son." "Well, I don't understand. On the one hand, you say I got to graduate from high school and college, and on the other hand, you said I'm not going to do well in school, so it must be because I'm stupid." And she said, "Son, it's not that you're stupid." I said, "Well, what do I lack?" She said, "Words." "Words? What are words?" And she says, "Noises that are pregnant with meaning." Ooh. I knew she said something profound, but I didn't understand what she had said. I said, "I don't understand." She says, "Son, listen carefully. A textbook got 3,500 words. How many? 3,500 words that are middle class in definition. Teachers got 4,000, 5,000. How many? People from the hood and from poverty show up with 1,500 words. How many? So he says, "You're short, even if you had 2,000. And I said, "But I'm using words." "Son, you're not listening to me. You have words. What you don't have are middle class proficient words that will allow you to become educable. Your parents could not give you what they didn't have. Consequently," and this is extremely important, I want all of you to say, schools are middle class places of learning. Say that. But not all students are middle class. And that's the rub. See, so I showed up intelligent, but I lacked the words to become educable because I didn't have middle class words that were pregnant with meaning, so I could interact, decode, apply, complete my projects, do my homework, grow, and graduate. Because I lacked intelligence, or what? What did I lack? I didn't have enough words. And so she says, "Son, you're going to have to do 3 things to fix that. Number 1, you're going to read. Number 2, you're going to read. And number 3, you're going to read. Read to expand your vocabulary. Read to find out how people that had it tougher than you bounced back from adversity and were nevertheless able to experience success in life and to make statistically significant contributions to solve the urgent problems of our time. You're going to read in order to learn abstract thinking and how to connect the dots. You're going to have to be a product of reading. And I said, "Read when?" Because we were very busy in that generation. We had Slinky and Jacks. And we play Kick the Can and Johnny and the Pony and Tag. And we had Hopalong Cassidy and Hattie Doody and Rock and Roll. She says, "No, son. You got to," and so she made a pie chart of my time and found out that there were 2 hours unaccounted for. And she says, "That's your reading time." And the busybody that she was, she kicked in my weekends. And because she was a Christian, she said, "Take time to be holy and then read." And so she said to me, everything that your generation considers to be important to do, resist doing that. Read 25 pages a day. And every time you see a word that you don't understand, think of it as a brick that hides the sunshine of understanding. And she gives me my first dictionary, and she says, son, with this, you can crush bricks. And it's going to be slow at the beginning. And it's going to pick up a little bit. And it's going to get a little faster. And soon you'll be able to read. And then perhaps the single most important question of all. Read what? And she said, memoirs. Say memoirs. Read memoirs of people that had it tougher than you. I said, what do you mean, Ms. Yamasaki? Former slaves. One in particular from Maryland that eventually escapes and goes to New York. And that slave tricked little white boys and girls to teach him how to read and write. And he wrote his pardon. And eventually he becomes an ambassador to a foreign country. Frederick Douglass, the narrative of a slave. And then she said, read the memoirs of Jews in death camps. Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. A Jew from Austria, a psychiatrist, loses everything and has to find meaning in a death camp. Helen Keller, a little white girl from Alabama. Her father was a captain in the Confederacy and the editor of a newspaper. Her mother, a Southern genteel lady, a second cousin to Robert A. Lee. They were people of means. But this little girl, born normal, by 19 months, she loses her sight. She loses her hearing. She's not speaking. And eventually she meets Annie Sullivan at age 7 and bounces back from adversity. And by the time her life was over, she had published 12 books, learned 4 different foreign languages, taught herself how to speak, was passionate about the rights of people that were deaf, was one of the founders of the ACLU, met with world leaders and with every president of the United States from Grover Cleveland to Jack F. Kennedy. That little girl became a champion of civil rights and human rights. The little white girl from the South bounced back from adversity and speaks to me as she speaks to you about transformation. Give me a bam. And so it came to pass that I increased my vocabulary. I said, Ms. Yamasaki, why do you want me to read the story of people who survive incest and abuse and immigration and war? People with physical disabilities who nevertheless make great contributions. About Jews in death camps and former slaves, and indigenous Native Americans who are made strangers in their own homeland. Why do you want me to do that? Son, for several reasons. Number one, you need to increase your vocabulary. And number two, don't you ever make a profession of feeling sorry for yourself because there have been people that had it tougher than you. And number three, she says, hear me out. Because this country, with all of its flaws, does not owe you a living. What it simply owes you is an opportunity. And you better become educable. It's your responsibility to create the cultural platform that will enable other people to grow you and to make it possible for you to make a larger contribution than the one that you otherwise have to make. Give me a bam. Amen. And that's how it happened. And I read, and I finally went to high school in a private boarding school with white kids. And they wouldn't let me room with a white guy, and that's all there was. So they gave me my own room, you figure. And I read, and I graduated from high school alone. Nobody showed up that I knew. 5.5 years later, I graduated from college not before my brother stole my money that I asked him to hold so I can go to college. And then he drives me to college in Michigan, tells them that he's going to send the money. He never did, but they accepted me with zero down, and it would take me 5.5 years to get through. At the heart of Vietnam, I get drafted. Ain't that something? But by then, the assassinations had taken place. Medgar Evers been assassinated in '63, early. John Kennedy assassinated. Malcolm X. Martin Luther King Jr. Bobby Kennedy, the riots, the problems. And because I had experiences with white folks, and I had experiences with black folks, and my Hispanic heritage, Mayor Richard J. Daley needed someone to go into the construction business, building bridges of understanding and tearing down walls of separation. And that I did. And then Harvard University looked around and realized that we needed inclusive talent developed at Harvard University. But how do we do that? Well, what they decided to do was to interview 1,500 underrepresented people. You know how sometimes in our agency you see interns, and you may see a lot of black interns or Latino interns, and you're saying, how come we don't have any white interns? Well, because they're trying to get underrepresented people. There is no race solution to the race problem, but that's what we do sometimes. Harvard University went out and interviewed 1,500 folks to see if we could do the rigor, if we can get the endorsements and letters of recommendation, and we can indicate that we could do research. And they accepted 29 of us, and I was one of the 29. And I'll never forget, one of my professors says, "Sam, may I speak with you?" I said, "Yes, sir." He says, "How'd you get in?" I said, "You know that don't sound right." And he said to me, "Son, I don't mean any insult. You deserve a seat in my class. What I want to know is, how was Harvard University wise enough to understand that it's going to take all of us to build a better society, one that is stronger, healthier, more productive, and freer?" I said, "Sir, they're honoring the memory and legacy of Dr. King and that of African Americans alongside Viola Liuzzo and other white folks and other groups that want to get rid of illegal discrimination. And so that's why I'm here." They went out and they interviewed us, we qualified, and here I am. And he looked at me and he says, "I would like to honor Dr. King too." I said, "Doc, how do you propose to do that?" He says, "I'd like to be your professor. I'd like to be your mentor." I said, "Prof, how do you propose to do that?" He says, "I would like to be your mentor." And I said, "With all due respect, sir, what's a mentor?" I didn't even know the definition of mentor, let alone that I needed one. And he says, "Son, and catch this. You may want to shout it out and write it down. What is a mentor?" This is the definition that he gave me. Let me give you the criteria. Shout it out. Number one, he says somebody who is older. Say older. More experience. Wiser. And generous in spirit. And I said, "Well, what does that make me?" He says, "Someone who is younger." Say younger. Less experience. With fire in the belly. Hungry to matter. Eager to learn. In spirit. And says, "Son, you need to authorize me to tell you something that no one else will tell you." You need a mentor. I said, "Why do I need a mentor?" He says, "Because nobody knows what they want until they know what options are available." Number two, very, very important, every organization, as my colleague Rich Johnson says as well, every organization has a public face and a private face. And the public face will recruit you, but the private face does not always know how to develop you. And I said, "Well, do I have to listen to what you say?" "No, but you got to hear me out." He says, son, now that you got in, I'm going to make sure you get through. You need to say to each other, now that you got recruited, I'm going to make sure that you grow to your fullest potential at APHIS. Give me a bam. So there he was, a white male, a Republican. Well, if you come from Chicago, there he was, a white male, very successful in a prestigious university, got out of his comfort zone. And the law did not require that he reach out, just like Mary Yamasaki, the law did not require that she reach out, but they did. And as a result of that, I was able to be developed, I was able to graduate, and when Mr. Nixon appointed him to a position in Washington, he took me with him. And that's how I was able to travel and to learn. So I am a product of mentoring for transformation, for greater effectiveness in life. And as a result of that, all I can tell you is, you don't have to be black to mentor somebody black. You don't have to be female to mentor somebody female. All you've got to be able to do is to have a vision to realize that all of us need some guidance beyond simply being accepted in the organization, because recruiters recruit, but it's the organizational culture that grows, promotes, and retains. Give me a bam. All right, if you could be so kind, stand up and shake hands with 3 people you haven't shaken hand with. Let's do transformation right. I want to show you some video clips that suggest why transformation is absolutely essential at APHIS and USDA. Remember, I want you to say, if we work for a federal agency, say that.
If we work for a federal agency,
that agency has discriminated. And that agency has to take steps to correct the errors of the past.
and that agency has to take steps to correct errors of the past.
And you're about to see Dennis Blair, used to work with the intelligence community. He was an admiral in the Navy. And watch what he says about the agencies that he's worked with and how they took steps to correct it.